What's up, slackers? Welcome back to Bearded Hardware. If you've been following my Threadripper streams, we've obviously had a lot of issues. We've been testing a lot of different things, and I've noticed some issues with the board when we've been benching on stream. If you followed them closely, you've noticed that I kept on talking about a thing called OCP, which is overcurrent protection. What that means is that when the VRM detects a certain amount of current that's coming through the board, it basically shuts it off. So it's kind of limited in our clocks compared to everybody else. That's pretty much why we've been benching so low compared to all, if you look at HWBot leaderboards and stuff like that. So I reached out to MSI and we came up with an OCP mod, which is basically gonna fool and hopefully get the system running properly, like how we're supposed to be doing on liquid nitrogen. Now it's pretty normal. Back in the day, we used to do this quite a bit. I mean, we would do OVP, OCP. We would do what's called the FB mod, like basically a voltage mod. Lots of stuff like this. So it's pretty typical to do. I wasn't really expecting it, so it takes a little bit to figure out. But anyways, so what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to rip apart the board. And I figured since we're ripping apart the board, we not only are gonna do the mod, but we should also insulate the board and get it ready for liquid nitrogen. Because this is one of the reasons why I wait and test the board frequently before I end up actually put it in under the juice. Let's get it started. So the first part we're gonna do is we have to figure out where this mod is. So if you look closely near the CPU connectors, it's underneath there. So what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to remove the entire VRM. There's a bunch of screws that need to be taken out, so you might as well just quit talking about it and just get down to it, if you know what I'm saying. I'm gonna end up removing all the M2 coolers, because they're all connected and intertwined, and it looks like I'm gonna have to remove everything, because it's just blocking and everything seems to be connected, so I'm just gonna remove everything. We also have to make sure that when we go to put it under liquid nitrogen, we have to insulate the board. So we're also going to take off a couple, pretty much anything that has to do with the VRM, cooling or mounting on the back and the front of the board. Of the chipset, you want to make sure that you keep the little like a spacer to keep from the metal digging into the board. Just make sure you keep them for both of the chipset mounts. We're also going to remove the Wi-Fi module. We want to make sure we get liquid electrical tape in there properly, so we need to remove that too. To get the top heatsink off, we're going to have to remove the back plate where all the USB and everything connects to the board. It's only 4 screws. There's a small fan right down by the chipset. You want to remove that. It's kind of small, especially compared to my fingers. There's also a small little connector that's underneath right by where the keyboard and the mouse go in. Yeah, it looks like they're just using some cheap thermal pads. They'll probably do the job, but we're going to end up upgrading them later, so we want to see exactly what's being covered. You can tell there's 2 rows on the VRM itself. It's 16-phase power, digital power, so yeah. It runs pretty hot. I've had to have a fan on it before. I hit some OTP protections when the VRM was getting too hot, so we want to make sure this is running extra cool before we put on the liquid nitrogen. You can see here the resistor that we need to remove to fool the controller. What this does is basically will change the value that is reported back to the controller for how much current is coming through. So that way we can pretty much run unlimited current. So you can see how small it is. I have it enlarged because it's much smaller than that. So let's get started on the mod. Now, since I couldn't find my hot air station, usually for when I pull resistors, I tend to use a hot air gun, or basically a hot air station. But I can't seem to, since obviously I've moved, I can't figure out where the hell I put it. So I've been searching through the garage. It's been driving me nuts. So the next best thing is to use a heat gun, but you have to be very careful for burning stuff all around the board. So one of the things that I like to do is basically use a heat temp. So basically the heat temp, what you can do is put the heat temp around that, and what that does is it absorbs the heat from going into the different plastics and stuff like that. So that way it tries to reduce the burning of around the controller and everything else, trying to reduce the risk of burning and killing the board. So you want to use a lot of this to block off the areas that might melt, like the CPU connectors, the memory connectors. You want to make sure that it doesn't get too hot there, because obviously heat melts plastic. So we don't want to try to go too hot, but we want to be hot enough so that way we can melt the solder, and that way we can just pull off the resistor with ease. Usually with a soldering iron it's a little bit harder, but depending on the soldering iron you have, but again I can't find that one either, so we're going to go with a heat gun. We're going to do it the slack way. Now what you want to do is when you're heating the gun up, you want to try to keep it on the actual component itself, just to see. It might take a little bit, and it might be weird to I know it's very difficult to video and try to do this at the same time, but you just want to kind of put it there and just let it go and try to heat up the solder as most. I'm using the microscopes looking at it, so you can't really see on the screen, but I'm basically looking at it to try to pull it off. Yeah, success! That thing was so tiny, especially with these monster hands. It's kind of hard to, I don't know. It's kind of hard to do these things, but I've done them over the years. Still don't know how. It's the slacker way. It's TechOdin. Alright, let's remove the tape and see how it did. One of the things that I usually do before you mod or anything like that, you want to check the board to make sure it's working. Obviously we were doing it on the stream, so I know it's working. Right after I did this mod, I'm gonna basically set up everything and make sure it works. That way, make sure it posts. That way I don't go through all the pain of actually putting LET on. So, I don't know. Let's see if it works. Hopefully it does. And it works! Paying no attention to the temperatures. I basically just put the heat spreaders on just so it's just to give it a little cool. We just want to test, make sure it works. That way we know that it didn't die. That would suck. So, yeah. Now, the next thing we're going to do is basically we're going to insulate the motherboard. Now, you guys have seen me do the spray-on liquid electrical tape. You've probably seen me do Vaseline. One of the probably most ways that I use is this good stuff, liquid electrical tape. Now, liquid electrical tape, this is, I think, the Gardner Bender version. Yeah, Gardner Bender. There's other brands like, I think, Starbright, Plastidip. This one is, I don't know, it seems to be a thicker, and obviously it's the harder one to get off, so usually when I do these, I only do it to the boards that are going to be strictly benchboard, because pretty much once you put this stuff on, you're not going to end up taking it off. So, but yeah, so I'm going to end up using this in a syringe, and I'll show you how to do it, and check it out. Now on the syringe, I like to drill a hole through the sides. What that does is it basically releases pressure when you start wanting to push the back part on, when you have all the liquid electrical tape in there. Otherwise, when you stick it on, you barely have the plunger in, and it's already shooting the liquid electrical tape out. And you got to be careful for that, because you don't want to get any tape inside like the memory slots or anything, because 9 times out of 10 you're pretty much not going to get it out of there. So what I like to do is basically just drill the hole in there. It releases the air pressure, and once you get past that spot, it gives you a nice comfortable grip on the actual plunger, so that way when you're pushing it out and getting it all around, it works pretty well. So just a pro tip. When you want to put on the LET, you got to be careful for the memory slots, but you want to get them all over the VRM. You want to be careful for any water that's going to pool up just from condensation from it being too cold. We're probably going to be benching anywhere from minus 140C to minus 196C. So you want to prepare for water falling off the pot, just condensation building up, and trying to be, I don't know, just be careful. Make sure, go around the slot everywhere, in between the memory slots and everything. So. So we finished the top of board. Now we got to do the back of the board. And what I like to do is I basically want to go and get all the capacitors on the back of the CPU, because the CPU is going to be the coldest. On the back, you're going to have a lot of condensation that builds up. So you want to protect all those capacitors from having any pooled water, because it will affect your clocks. A lot of different weird things were going on, and it's hard enough to do liquid nitrogen, but to do it liquid nitrogen with a lot more problems, it makes it kind of a nightmare. So basically what I wanted to do is put down like one layer and just use the brush. I don't usually use the brush on the top because you want to be careful getting it in all the slots and everything, but you can pretty much use the brush on the back and spread it all out. Makes it easier that way and goes a lot quicker. On the front, definitely use the syringe. So we're gonna end up using thermal grizzly pads on pretty much everywhere on the VRM, anywhere, any part where the heatsink was touching before previously. I'm gonna double up on the pads itself. These are really good pads. You can buy them pretty much on Amazon, anywhere else. I'll have links in the description. You could buy them. Basically, you cut them up and put them. Pretty much use them for anything you want. You can use on motherboards, GPUs. The reason why we're doing this is because we want to make sure the board is kept cool and make sure it's working properly. You don't want to have OTP issues, temperature protection issues. You want to make sure the board's running the way it should. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of issues putting on liquid nitrogen, because when you put stuff on liquid nitrogen, it stresses it out. It makes it so you need to make sure it's running strong before you try to, I don't know, kill it. Now for prep, we're going to use the good old CRC spray. You'll see a link in the description. We use this to clean all motherboards, CPUs, all sorts of stuff. So we're going to use that, and the famous blue paper towel is going to clean up the chipset, and pretty much anywhere we're going to have contact with the pads. You're going to want to clean the heatsink pretty much in every spot where there was a thermal pad before. You want to make sure it adheres, and that way you're getting good heat conductivity. Now when you go to put the heatsink back on, you want to make sure that it's actually touching, and that when you put the thermal pads on, that everything's connected and you got good heat conductivity. Because to be honest, if you don't pay attention to what you're doing, you can actually end up giving yourself more issues. So you want to be very particular. You also want to make sure that you put all the fans in, all the connectors that we disconnected, like the chipset fans, stuff like that. Make sure that's all connected back before you start clamping everything down. Finally, once you have everything put back together, you want to put all your memory cooler back on, and you want to do a test run. Make sure that your motherboard's actually holding temps, the CPU is holding temps. Make sure everything's running good. So that way we don't end up killing stuff. On the CPU, we're going to end up using Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut. Great paste. I got a lot of it, so it's definitely good stuff. I tend to use it. I use it for liquid nitrogen, but I also I'll use it for air and water setups too. It just works. It's good. It's basically non-conductive. It's a great paste that you can pretty much use in all your setups. Now it looks like the board is a success. You want to go into the BIOS and make sure you check everything, like the motherboard temp. The motherboard temp looks good at 29C here, so looks like we're pretty good. Now we can bench and test everything out. So it looks like it's booting. We got a good temps on the motherboard, good on the CPU. It looks like everything's running correctly. I'm basically loading up my previous profile. So looks like we're good for liquid nitrogen. Now it's time to really test it out. So that's it, Slackers. It looks like the OCP mod is working quite well, actually. Just a little update. Basically, when we were running through the streams before, again, those streams are going to be in the description. We had some issues, basically running like Cinebench R20, where we could only go to about 4.2, 4.25, and we couldn't really do any more voltage than 1.35. As soon as we hit 1.4, we'd end up hitting OCP and the board would basically shut down when that current was pulling. So now it's like a whole new animal. Basically, I was running before at 4.425 at like 1.45 volts, and it's screaming R20, man. I ended up improving the score by like probably like over 1,000 points. So definitely, if you have this MSI Creator TRX40 motherboard, you're gonna want to OCP mod it just for the overclocks that you can get for your daily use, because I mean it's quite insane when you're scoring about 1,000 more points just from a mod on a motherboard. So yeah, we're gonna end up doing some more liquid nitrogen stuff. Just stay tuned, like and subscribe. We're gonna be doing some liquid nitrogen craziness, and yeah, that's it. Slacker out.